Hi, in this video I'm going to demonstrate how to knit a patchwork strip. In front of me I've got several different versions, so strips can be knitted in various shapes and also in a wide range of stitch patterns, as opposed to some of the other patchwork knitting techniques where garter stitch is a very integral part of how the patchwork works. So in this sample here I've got two basic garter stitch strips. This one is garter stitch and stocking stitch. This strip has been worked as a bias strip with both garter stitch and stocking stitch, and at the end here this is a strip that's worked with short row knitting. One feature that is the same in all of these pieces is that they have a chain selvage. So if I hold up this piece here, hopefully you can see clearly, there's a row of chains along each side of the strip. And that is a very important feature for this particular technique, because when we move on to the next video, which will demonstrate how to start joining strips together, the joining is done through the chain selvage. So to start with, I'll demonstrate how to knit a basic strip with a chain selvage. So I'm just using, this is a double knit weight yarn, and I'm using short needles because I happen to prefer knitting patchwork with these shorter Knit Pro needles. You can knit them with any length of needle or any style, so if you prefer working with a long straight needle or a circular needle, this technique is all the same. It doesn't matter what the needle is. So I'm just going to cast on some stitches, and I'm using the knit cast on. For most patchwork knitting, the knit cast on is the most useful method of casting on, because it allows you to come back at a later stage and pick up the cast on edge easily when you want to put an edging or a border on. So I've just counted my stitches. Okay, I've only cast on 12 stitches. Again, with patchwork knitting, a lot of the time you're only working on a few stitches, which is why these shorter needles are so much more useful to use. So to start the knitting, every row we're going to start by working through the back loop of the first stitch. So I'm going to knit through the back loop. Doesn't matter what stitch you're working for the rest of the row, you're going to knit through the back loop of the first stitch, and then I work to the end of the row, to the last stitch. When I get to the last stitch, I'm working knit, so I want to bring the yarn forward between the needles, so the yarn is now at the front, and slip the last stitch purlwise. Turn the knitting. I'm going to work this sample in garter stitch, but if you were working stocking stitch, even though you would then purl this next row, you would still knit through the back loop. So front loop, back loop, knit through the back loop of the first stitch, knit to the end, to the last stitch of the row, and you need to bring the yarn forward. Let me just get some more yarn. You need to bring the yarn forward between the needles and slip the last stitch purlwise. Because I'm working garter stitch, both sides of the knitting will look the same. So something that's a useful tip, if you have a locking stitch marker, you can put your locking stitch marker into a stitch at the front. So this will tell me that every time the stitch marker is facing me, I'm working a right side row. Again, I'm going to knit through the back of the first stitch. Knit across the row. To the last stitch. Bring the yarn forward between the needles and slip the last stitch purlwise. When I'm looking at the knitting now, the locking stitch marker is the other side of the knitting to where I am, so this is the wrong side row. Knit one through the back loop, knit to the end of the row, we get to the last stitch, we bring the yarn forward between the needles, slip the last stitch purlwise. You're only working the edge stitches every other row because we knit through the stitch at the beginning of the row and we slip it at the end of the row. So it's only ever worked every other row, which is what gives you this chain. So there's the chain from the first two rows. Here's the chain for the next, and the same on this end. We've got a chain here, and when we come back, this will form the chain at the end of this next row. So it's a very simple process. As I say, it doesn't matter what stitch you're working, and these techniques can be used with stocking stitch or combinations of different stitches. The one thing you need to be aware of, for example, if you do work in stocking stitch, is to try not to pull your chains too tightly. So we've got to the end of the row again, I'm bringing the yarn forward and slip one. The reason I'm mentioning this is because stocking stitch has a different row gauge to garter stitch. So if you do chain salvage on stocking stitch, it has to stretch slightly further. It works very well when you're working in stocking stitch throughout because all the pieces are worked in the same way. But as I can show you from one of the other samples, this is a combination of stocking stitch and garter stitch. I still have all the chains up each edge to give me my nice neat edge, and also to provide somewhere to work my joining when I want to join one strip to another. It also helps if, for example, it is quite a neat free edge, but again you can still use this edge to pick up if you're going to put a band on. You're going to be picking up, if you were going to be picking up stitches, you would pick up one stitch per chain up this edge. So that's how to knit a strip with the chain selvage.